because it's probably more interesting to hear what you guys are thinking and have a chat. But I guess the most obvious thing to say is my favourite thing about the Green Party, literally my favourite thing, is our grassroots nature. That rather than having that kind of top-down, corporate, kind of very flashy approach, we're very much about communities, about people working together. And it doesn't get more community than giving a speech in someone's living room. And so it's just lovely to see everyone who's come out here today, and thank you very much for being here. I've been outdoor knocking this morning in Epping Forest, so I'm nicely warmed up. I've been speaking to people all morning. And actually what I want to say to you, I guess, is what I've been hearing on every single doorstep this morning, which is lots of people who have voted either Conservative or Labour in the past, who are both looking for something different. Now, it's not enough for me just to come here and say Conservatives are awful and Labour are awful for X, Y and Z reasons, although that is true. We've got to offer something different, and I think where we really do something as a party is we offer that positive vision and hope and a tangible plan for action. I think even if people have voted Conservative in the past, they've seen 14 years of austerity. I know Harlow, we were just chatting on the way over here, has particularly felt that in terms of lack of services, lack of investment, just a general feeling of being left behind, like an old phrase, but that kind of, it just doesn't feel like the representation of the councillors are there and really speaking up for the people who live here. And so then people are looking at the Labour Party, and I know Harlow has some areas that has staunch Labour support. But again, I'm sure you're hearing from friends and colleagues that Keir Starmer does not represent the Labour Party that they support. This is a man who won't stand up for the trade unions, who won't speak up for workers' rights. On the climate crisis, literally something that is facing all of us as an existential crisis, particularly for young people, not to scare the little ears over there. But we've got to protect this planet, and we've got to protect all the species on the planet, you know, if we're going to have any kind of livable future, both for us and, yes, for young people. And also with what's happening in the Middle East, they've just seen a complete lack of any moral leadership or courage coming from the Labour Party. So that's why they're awful. But as I said, it's not enough just for us to say they're awful, do something different. But I think people are already receptive to the idea that they want something different, that they've just got a feeling, even if they're not following politics closely, it's just a gut feeling or in their hearts that actually we can do better than this. And so I think the Green Party I'll talk about nationally first of all, but then talk about Harlow specifically. Nationally, I think with a party that are saying we have this mass inequality in our society. It gets called a cost of living crisis, but actually there are some people who are doing very, very well out of the cost of living crisis.
Exactly.
Well, exactly. And so what we have really is an inequality crisis, where the gap between the poorest and most vulnerable in society and the richest multimillionaires and billionaires has never been wider. And we've just been through this pandemic, this kind of mass shock to society. But actually within that shock, what we saw was that gap get even wider. Now, that's not people, that's not our communities. When people say people are just in it for themselves or they vote in self-interest, never forget that within a week of COVID hitting, the amount of people who signed up for mutual aid groups, the amount of people who said, actually, I care about my own health, and that's you know, first and foremost, but actually when I've got time and space to breathe, the first thing these people turned to was, what can I do for my community? How can I protect people? And I think that's what the Green Party speaks to, and I think we need to speak to those people and not get caught up in the scepticism or cynicism of the old two-party system, but say there's a different way of doing politics, and part of that is speaking to people in their living rooms. So that's nationally, and so with that, in terms of a tangible plan, we've been pushing for a wealth tax, because what we hear constantly from the Labour Party is, yeah, we want all of these lovely ideas, but we can't afford them. But actually we know that if we just taxed the wealthiest 1%, so we're talking about people with assets of over £10 million, if we just tax them 1%, something they would hardly even notice on their wealth and assets, that would raise between 20 and 70 billion pounds a year that you could then be putting into investment. You could also be looking at a carbon tax, so taxing some of the highest polluting industries. Anyway, you've not come here for a taxation conversation, but my point more is that this central idea of there's no money left, we have to challenge, because ultimately we need our public services to be in public hands. And then again, just chatting on the way here, I know there's been a huge issue around housing in this area, and actually the council outsourcing housing to private companies, when actually we used to have a really good system in this country of council housing, and they called it social housing, but ultimately I don't think we should be ashamed of council housing for council tenants. And I think being able to get back to some of those principles to stand up and say that is one thing. I think secondly, on the national level, is just the courage to have the leadership. We were the first national party to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Absolutely, the hostages also need to be released. And I know talking about international politics when a council level is not something that's generally done, But I think it's an important demonstration of principles that actually, even when things are difficult or there's a more challenging story to be told, we're willing to tell that story. And then finally, I guess on the national level, the thing to end up on is the climate crisis. Everyone knows that the Green Party care about the climate crisis, but we also know that the climate crisis is a crisis of social justice. The people internationally who are facing the worst effects of the climate crisis are often the people who have done the least to cause it and are the least resilient because of lack of funds. Now, that's not just international, it's national too. We've seen flooding and wildfires, and if you're wealthy enough, you can build a higher flood defence. If there's a wildfire, you can get away from it quicker when there's emergencies. So we need to make sure we're protecting the most vulnerable people. But that comes to the most local level too, because actually there's this real issue where people have given up on politics because they feel like they've never been represented. And I think what we're offering through our candidates and our target candidates, and thank you so much for standing, is someone who is going to listen, who is willing to turn up on the doorstep, to crucially talk about our policies, but more important than talking ever is listening, to actually say, what are the things you care about in your local area, match those to our values, and then be able to offer the solutions. And we've seen time and time again around the country, I'm sure you know, but in the last 4 years, we've over quadrupled our number of councillors. So previously, when I've knocked on doors, something you used to hear, you're hearing less and less, is, I love the Green Party, I love all your policies, but I just need a party that can win, and I don't think you can win. But actually, the more that people are seeing us winning across the country, the more that's making a difference. Now, do you have a challenge here in Harlow? Absolutely. I've not come here to be complacent. There's that real uphill of your first councillor. And we've noticed across the country again that where communities get one councillor, the next year or the next election, they often get 3 or 4 councillors. And then I'm not exaggerating, the next election you're talking 11, 12, sometimes 19, 20. You can take those huge jumps. It usually takes about 2 cycles. But the biggest challenge is always that first councillor, and that's where the challenge is now. So as you'll know, our strategy is always to pick an area and go, that's the area we're really going to focus on. Because once we've got one person there in the council, everyone else in all the other wards sees that councillors, see the work they're making, and that makes a difference. The conversation I was just having with the 2 men that you might have seen was, it's an intense conversation. They were passionate about the work they were doing around food waste and getting food into people's bellies, basically. And as I was listening to it, you know, the heartbreaking bit was, I thought, if I was somewhere where we had green representation, the easy answer here is to go, let's talk to your green councillors, let's get a campaign going. And even if we don't run the council, we've got green voices in the council who can represent for those people, and that's how we get change. You can still do that when you're not in the council, and I know that you've already been doing amazing work, all of you in fact, speaking out, asking questions at the council and getting those things done. But it is very different when you've got to vote and when the other parties look at you and they worry because they think, if we don't start acting, we're going to lose those seats. And I think, obviously, we want to win, and I really think you can win, which is why I've come today. And I also want you to know that even in campaigning, you're already changing that conversation because people know they can't be complacent, the challenge is coming. Having talked about the importance of listening, I've done a lot of talking, so I'm going to stop there. Any questions about anything, really? I don't know how long we've got, but someone tell me when to stop. Everyone always goes shy when I say anything.